First, though, to the United States, where the family of Senator Edward Kennedy mourns his passing. The 77-year-old died at his family home in Massachusetts on Tuesday evening. It was the end of a long and public battle with brain cancer. The news is likely to shock Americans as they wake up this morning. Kennedy served in the U.S. Senate since 1962, and he was at the helm of the legendary Kennedy clan, a family that's been hit by a string of tragedies. His two brothers, President John F. Kennedy and Robert Kennedy, were both assassinated in the 1960s. Let's cross now to correspondent Ed O'Keefe, who's in Washington, D.C. Ed, the Kennedy clan is mourning this Wednesday.
That's right. They issued a statement late Tuesday night saying in part that we've lost the irreplaceable center of our family and joyous light in our lives, but the inspiration of his faith, optimism, and perseverance will live in our hearts forever. They call him, of course, a grandfather, a father, brother, and uncle, and husband who they had loved so dearly. The center, the patriarch of the Kennedy family, dead at the age of 77 after a battle with brain cancer that lasted a little more than a year. His last big public appearance was at the inauguration of President Obama earlier this year. The stress of that, the cold weather, caused him to have a seizure, and ever since then, he's been basically confined to his homes in Massachusetts and Florida. He died Tuesday night at the home in Hyannisport, Massachusetts.
Now, Ed, talk us through the central role that Edward Kennedy has had in American politics. He was a central figure for decades.
It's really unrivaled in American history, as you mentioned. Elected to the Senate in 1962, replacing his brother. He's been there ever since. He ran once for president in 1980, unsuccessfully challenging another member of his party, Jimmy Carter, and since then really has focused on several issues of great concern to him. Health care, which of course is an issue that continues to this day, education reform, civil rights, equal rights for women, several issues concerning disabled children, AIDS research. He partnered with President Bush in early 2001 on a major education reform bill, was criticized by members of his own party, and has been known to work with other Republicans, and he had very close friendships with many of them. He was also uniquely positioned during the 2008 presidential campaign in that he had very close relationships with all of the major Democratic candidates, but in the end endorsed Barack Obama, bypassing his good friendship with the Clintons because he saw something in Obama that he hadn't seen since his own brother's presidential run back in 1960.
Now, Ed, one of the issues that were close to Edward Kennedy's heart was, of course, health care, and it comes as his death comes as America is debating health care pushed by President Barack Obama. Some voices are already saying that this could impact this debate. What do you make of that, and what are people around you saying?
Well, yeah, most people around me are asleep at this hour, frankly, but it is believed that it will have an impact on the negotiations. And, you know, you talk to everyone at the White House, you talk to members of Congress, and they all admit that the lack of his presence really did have an impact because he was one of the few people who could bring Democrats and Republicans into a room, have them butt heads, and come to a decision. We know he had worked the phones. He had been in touch with his staff and with his Democratic and Republican colleagues, trying to get them to work together. But really the fact that he wasn't here in Washington in person made it almost impossible for him to really have a strong voice and an impact on these negotiations. I gotta believe, considering his death, considering the fact that he himself had suffered like so many Americans do, and the fact that he had worked on this issue for so long, that's going to inspire Democrats and Republicans to finally lay down the gauntlet, if you will, get into a room and negotiate some details that perhaps later this fall can be passed, and undoubtedly a lot of it will be tied to his legacy.
Now, Ed, as you say, it's still early on, but I'm guessing that most Americans will be impacted in some way by this news. Why do you think that Americans are so fascinated with the Kennedy clan?
Well, you know, there's maybe 4 families in American history that sort of stand in similar stead to the Kennedys. Obviously the Kennedys, the Roosevelts, the Bushes because of the 2 presidents from that family, and the Adams family, of course, from early in American history. So few families have contributed so much to American politics and American history. You know, this was one of the longest-serving senators in U.S. history. His brothers, of course, tragically killed in the 1960s. So many of his nieces and nephews continue to have an impact on politics and on community organizations. For example, his niece, Maria Shriver, the First Lady of California. His son Patrick is a congressman from the state of Rhode Island. His nephew Joseph is a former congressman from Massachusetts. His niece Caroline, the daughter of John Kennedy, briefly considered replacing Hillary Clinton in the Senate from New York earlier this year, while another nephew earlier this summer considered running for Barack Obama's Senate seat from Illinois. And yet another niece once served as lieutenant governor of Maryland. So you get a sense of the wide impact of this family. But amid all that, they also helped establish and run the Special Olympics program, which, of course, continues to this day around the world. President Kennedy created the Peace Corps, and his family was deeply involved in its creation and its success. So many other pieces of legislation, whether it be domestic or foreign, the Kennedys had something to do with, and certainly his impact will live on for quite some time. Other commentators have suggested arguably his legacy may live on and become much more notable than that of his brothers. And frankly, considering the more than 40 years he served in the Senate, that's a pretty good assessment.
All right, Ed O'Keefe reporting there from Washington, D.C. Thanks very much for now.